Welcome back, everyone, to the ASEAN-Korea ESG Forum. I believe you're now ready to kick off with our second session with the title, Increasing ESG Impact for Sustainable Development in ASEAN. Well, this session will discuss ways to advance ESG awareness as well as to foster the ESG practices among the SMEs in the ASEAN region and in Korea. So we're very privileged to have four esteemed speakers as well as the moderator who are joining for this session. So let me first introduce to you our moderator, His Excellency Shin Nam, the former Ambassador for Climate Change and Vice President for the United Nations Associations of the Republic of Korea. And of course, we're joined by four speakers. First of all, we have Mr. Khairul Ridzwan from the Securities Commissions Malaysia. We also have Mr. Andrew Chan from PwC Asia Pacific. And we have Ms. Sharmine Si Min TAN from the National University of Singapore. And now I introduce to you Ms. Krisztina Grütter, the founder of Swiss Sustainability Consulting. Well, before we carry on with the programs, let me tell you that after all the presentations, we have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to submit them through the QR code that has been provided at the program leaflet. Having said that, we're going to welcome to the podium Mr. Khairul Ridzwan, General Manager of International Affairs at the Securities Commissions Malaysia and alternate board member of ASEAN Taxonomy Board to present us on the ASEAN Taxonomy and ESG initiatives in ASEAN. Let's welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good morning. His Excellency Kim, Secretary General of the ASEAN-Korea Center, His Excellency Songkhan Luang Muninton, Ambassador of Laos, PDR to the Republic of Korea. Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to all of you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the ASEAN-Korea Center for inviting me to speak at the forum here today. Today I will be speaking on the ASEAN taxonomy and recent ESG initiatives in the ASEAN region, particularly on transition. I'll be presenting in my capacity as a member of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, although as the MC has mentioned, I'm from Securities Commission Malaysia, which is a member of the ATB. So a bit of background on the taxonomy and the sustainability agenda in ASEAN in general. So there's been, I think, a recognition of the importance of sustainability in ASEAN for some years now. And in 2020, the sectoral bodies in the finance sector, particularly the ones for banking and capital markets, respectively issued reports and roadmaps on sustainable financing. So these were, I think if you see the logos at the bottom of the screen over there, the roadmap for ASEAN capital markets issued by the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. The middle one is the roles of ASEAN central banks in managing climate and environment-related risks. This was issued by the central bankers, and also a third report for promoting sustainable finance, also issued by the capital market regulators of the Capital Market Development Working Committee. So a common recommendation among the various recommendations in these reports was the importance of a taxonomy for sustainable finance to be developed in ASEAN. So what is a taxonomy essentially? And forgive me for going back to, I think perhaps a very basic question, but just to set the tone, it is a guide or rather a classification system as to what is a sustainable activity. So this is important in many ways to set policies, but mainly for guidance for the finance sector if you are looking for investments and loans, for example, for those lending facilities that emphasize sustainability. It is easier for the lenders to identify that an activity or project is sustainable if there is a guide such as a taxonomy that defines what to look out for. And of course, there are established taxonomies already in place. The EU taxonomy, I think, is the most notable among them. And national level taxonomies are also being developed, as Dr. Melati mentioned just now. But why the need for an ASEAN taxonomy? And the reason why is that ASEAN wants to have a common voice and standardized criteria in terms of sustainable finance. We also felt that without such a taxonomy, investments in the region may be hampered in a way because there will be additional costs if there is a fragmented approach to definitions of sustainable finance in the different ASEAN countries. So thus this existence of a common voice and terminology is important to facilitate investors looking to ASEAN as a region to invest in. So I'm very mindful of time as well, and I think most of you would have had the opportunity to look at the slides that were given to you in your pack. But I think the important thing to note from this slide is that Dr. Melati was talking about the ASEAN way just now, and I think careful care was taken so that a representative from each of the 10 ASEAN member states are on the board of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, so that whatever developments that we make has the input of all ASEAN countries. Now, I will skip this slide because it's also covered in this slide, which is basically a graphical representation of the design of the taxonomy. And if I may take you through the sections, if you look at your extreme left, so these are the broad principles, the environmental objectives, and the essential criteria that underpins the taxonomy. So if you are familiar with the European taxonomy and also the K taxonomy, you may find the objectives familiar. Climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, protection of the environment, biodiversity, and so on. So these are the objectives that must be in place. You may choose one to use the taxonomy, and also the essential criteria there must be complied with. That is, that you do no significant harm to any of the other environmental objectives. You include, and if there is harm, there must be remedial measures to transition in place, and also social aspects need to be considered as well. Looking at and how to implement this in the taxonomy, there are two sections. The first is the foundation framework, which is a principle-based approach to the taxonomy, in that a set of guiding questions is provided for you to determine whether an activity is sustainable or not. And some countries in ASEAN are already adopting this principles approach, such as Malaysia. The Philippines also intends to develop a taxonomy based on this approach. The other part is the plus standard, which provides more detailed guidance on how to determine whether an activity is taxonomy aligned or not. So the plus standard is what you would normally see in established taxonomy, such as the EU taxonomy. They provide you with thresholds and metrics for qualification of the activity. So Singapore, for example, in its Singapore taxonomy, and the Thai taxonomy also adopts this kind of approach. So we have two standards, and why we have these two different types of taxonomy is to provide for the different levels of economic development in all 10 ASEAN member states. So an ASEAN member state, a country, may choose to adopt the principles-based foundation framework if they feel that their country is more ready to adopt that. But if they feel that they can impose this metrics on their stakeholders, they can choose to adopt the plus standard. So these principles, what you see on screen, are how we stipulate or set the screening criteria for the plus standard that I mentioned just now. So for the plus standard, as opposed to the EU taxonomy and the Singapore and Thai taxonomy, where there is only one set of criteria that you may apply. For the ASEAN taxonomy, there are 3 different tiers, again, based on your level of readiness. The green tier is the most ambitious tier, and it's aligned with achieving a 1.5 degrees Celsius objective under the Paris Agreement. The amber tiers are those which we say are in the process of transition, so slightly lower thresholds, on the basis that the amber tiers will, over time, in about 10 years or so, will be phased out or sunsetted, leaving the green tier to be the only criteria for the taxonomy in future years. So yes, very mindful of time, but I would like to mention this criteria, and apologies if it is quite small. We have included criteria for the phasing out of coal-fired power plants. And in fact, we were the first regional taxonomy to do so. What this means is that we provide criteria for funding of the early closure of coal-fired power plants, which I think, as Dr. Melati also mentioned just now, is one of the key sources of energy power generation in ASEAN, but of course it's one of the highest emitting sectors. So what this criteria does is to provide a classification based on the age of the power plants and the types of power plants being used, whether they have employed the best in class technology or so on. So an important aspect of that is the phase out must occur by a certain date, which is by 2040 for the green tier, and also the overall duration of the operation of the plant is capped at a certain number of years, which is 35 years for all 3 tiers. So what the objective of this is recognizing that we are not financing or encouraging the financing of power plants, but rather financing and encouraging the early closure of these coal-fired power plants. So I think just to take you to the end of my presentation, it's important to remember that the taxonomy is an activity level guide. So you will see assessment criteria based on activities, meaning that if you want to finance the building of what do you call it, a hydropower facility, for example. So you can use the taxonomy. However, it is not so much useful as a way to assess the sustainability level of an entity as a whole. An entity, as you may appreciate, may have several activities or business operations in their organization. So it's perhaps not so suitable for the taxonomy to be used in doing so, although you may use it for different activities. So ASEAN has also developed a transition finance guidance, which was just launched in October this year, to help entities move forward on their transition journey. So again, as with the ASEAN taxonomy, these are voluntary guides, but we hope this will be used among stakeholders in the region as a way to start their sustainability journey and transition journey. I think I will stop here for now. Thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the panel discussion shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khairul, for setting out the stage. Well, yes, as you have mentioned, he have mentioned the ASEAN taxonomy as well as the ESG initiatives in ASEAN to help the entities move towards the sustainability. And now we have Mr. Andrew Chan, the Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy and Transformation Leader at PwC Asia Pacific, who will present on the ASEAN businesses' journey towards a sustainable supply chain. Let's have him start his presentation with a big round of applause.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and good morning, Your Excellencies. Thank you again to ASEAN-Korea Center for the invitation to share on this topic. So we've already heard from Dr. Nongsari in her sharing. And setting the context, why am I covering sustainable supply chains when this session is focused on SMEs? SMEs are integral to sustainable supply chains. The amount of companies, governments that have committed to net zero, and the challenge is really scope 3, of which suppliers and SMEs are a big component of the scope 3 emissions. In addition, for the ASEAN context, SMEs make up well over 50% of our workforce, and so not including SMEs in the transition, the ESG transition, would make it extremely difficult for us to achieve those targets. So in my sharing, I'll cover 3 angles. Just the background, why are we focusing on sustainable supply chains? What are some of the practices that are being adopted? And some thoughts about how we could further strengthen supply chains moving forward. First of all, I'm going to start with the regulatory side of things because we're at the ASEAN-Korea Forum. Again, Dr. Nongsari flagged some of these in her sharing. And we can see a lot of these jurisdictions that have been laid out here. EU and US dominate this list. It's not a comprehensive list, but a lot of action is happening in the EU, US. In addition, Dr. Nongsari mentioned the US Customs and Border Patrol has actually prevented some goods being sold in the US because they don't fulfill some sustainability obligations. So things like the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDD, that's highlighted as number 3. Non-EU companies, it applies to EU companies, but in terms of ASEAN impact, ASEAN companies with significant presence in the EU would have to have due diligence conducted, or you will have due diligence conducted on you. The interesting angle on this, EU consultation was done. Across multiple stakeholders, 70% of businesses who responded to the consultation said, EU action on corporate sustainability due diligence is needed. This is companies asking for this directive. Okay, so that's interesting insight to say we need playing fields leveled, and because supply chains are so complex, they cut across multiple geographies, how can regulation come in and support? Beyond regulation, we're also seeing other factors driving the need for us to embed sustainability much better into supply chains and help the SMEs in those supply chains respond. First point to highlight is disruption. We've seen the physical impacts of climate change already. Flooding, how that disrupts supply chain. Even during COVID, when the Suez Canal was blocked, that had a massive impact into our supply chains. So disruption, whether you say geopolitical risk, climate risks, we're going to see nature risks. We've seen already the impact of pandemics. Disruption is here to stay. And it's arguably more volatile than it used to be. I've already mentioned the regulatory pressure increasing, but also from Dr. Nongsari's presentation, she highlighted the trade flow, okay, and the big investments from Korea into the ASEAN region as well. So expectations flow through the value chain. Okay, whether you say emissions specific, and Korean companies would be looking at ASEAN companies and how they contribute to Scope 3 emissions. But there are also social issues in supply chains. An unfortunate business area growth that PwC has seen has been in social and human rights due diligence. International companies looking to do business in ASEAN are actually asking for more due diligence because of human rights issues that they've seen reported in headlines. Okay, this is also highlighted by reports such as the US Trafficking in Persons report. And then the final point to make is company or buyer pressure directly. The third bullet point here highlights that key decision makers in MNCs actually highlighted that in ASEAN, reviewing the sustainability credentials of their suppliers. Okay, this is why I've also mentioned human rights due diligence, social due diligence requests have been increasing as well. So with that background, how are companies doing? The big message here is really, we're not doing fantastically. But it's also not fair to point the lens just on ASEAN countries and companies. If you look at the middle box, the global average is also not very strong. Whether you say there's complexity because of interconnectedness, we're not great at working through the supply chain. I actually think this is something a bit more endemic to us all, where the implementation gap is real. So it's nice to say we have policies. It's nice to say in ASEAN, or in Asia Pacific overall, we are ahead of the global average on things like net zero commitments. Commitment-wise, we're ahead of global average. But same studies will say, implementation-wise, we are behind the global average. Okay, is that a typical story for us in this region? Great commitment, but implementation is behind the curve. How do we address that? So here are just some examples across different commitment to implementation areas, just to highlight that point. And one thing that comes out of this is the longer the implementation gap and the deeper the implementation gap, the greater the risk towards greenwashing accusations. Is this something we want ASEAN and Asia Pacific to be known for? Too many organizations greenwashing. Just to give a couple of examples, we have seen silver lining. There have been some nice practices and commitments from companies across the region, but I would say, is this consistent enough? Is this strategic enough? Or were some of these initiatives a little bit fortunate to be done? But either way, there are silver linings and examples that companies can further build on and hope for the future. Picking up a couple of points here. Thai Union, one of the biggest seafood producers globally. The third point here, they work with their suppliers. And this is a point. They work with their suppliers to install mobile tracking. Where do their boats operate? Muzimas cooperative credit scheme. I think this will tie into our presentation later from Krisztina, talking about green finance. They work with banks, financial institutions. How do we bring sustainable financing into play to work with our smallholders and our small suppliers? Okay, so that's a big plantation company using their leverage power to work with a finance company to provide green financing schemes to their smallholders. And final point for me to wrap up is just some considerations and possibly some areas we may want to discuss as part of the panel. The first point is really, are we transforming the buyer-supplier relationship? Traditional procurement teams that we deal with, and I like Dr. Nongsari's point, highlighting one of the actions is government procurement. Are we signaling? Typically, government is the largest buyer in every single country. What are we signaling? Procurement teams are generally KPI tracked on pushing price down. That tends to be their primary KPI. Does that lead to the right ESG outcomes? When at the same time you're asking suppliers, please disclose your carbon emissions. Please watch out for forced labor, but we want to pay you the lowest price possible. Is that a fair outcome? Okay, so can we transform the buyer-supplier relationships? Examples of transformation in this space include education. Are we educating our SMEs around sustainability topics? Are we giving them some tools? If we say we want you to disclose on carbon, are we giving you some tools to help you do that? Capacity building. Okay. The second point is strengthening performance management. ESG data is not great. Anyone doing sustainability will say, ESG data, how much can we rely on it? So there are initiatives to try and improve the data, encouraging things. For example, if I take an example in Singapore by MAS, they have an AI-focused program that just actually was launched recently. At the same time in Malaysia, we've got the JC3 SME ESG portal that was just released last month. The final point to note is further collaboration for positive impact. This is not just the buyer-supplier relationship, this is across organizations. An example of this is in Bursa, Malaysia. In Malaysia, they are creating a corporate sustainability information platform. They're now collaborating with the Indonesian exchange and the Thai stock exchanges to expand that platform, potentially more to add into that. And if I just leave you with one final example of that, Petronas just completed a series of 4 just energy transition roundtables. This is a national oil company, and they invited NGOs, finance organizations, government stakeholders, regulators, to this closed-door roundtable to say, energy sector is at the sharp end of transformation, but we need to think about just transition, and we don't know enough about it. How do we all come together and learn and build capacity collectively? Okay, so that's the final thought. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chan, for the presentation. He has left us with a thoughts on how can the ASEAN businesses strengthen the supply chain. I think this can be discussed further at the roundtable discussion. And now I would like to invite Ms. Sharmine Si Min TAN, the sustainability leader for the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the National University of Singapore. Today she will give us a presentation on the ASEAN-Korea sustainability trends and enablers, building the business case for sustainability. Let's start our presentation with a big round of applause.
A very good morning, His Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow ESG advocates. It's a delight and pleasure to be here today. And I'd like to thank the organizing committee from ASEAN Korean Center for your warm hospitality and having me here today. So I'll be sharing with you a funnel approach by first looking at the broader ESG trend and picking up on 6 of the trends that Dr. Nongsari mentioned earlier on, and also giving you some of the enablers, which are resources that will be useful for businesses. And then the main focus of my presentation would be on how do we go about building a business case for sustainability. In the global race towards decarbonization, we've seen 9 out of the 10 ASEAN countries, including Korea, committing to a net zero target. Each ASEAN country has launched its own series of national sustainability policies, but if we look deeper into what are some of the commonalities among the policies out there, we see 3 common focuses. It's on climate resilience and adaptation, greenhouse gas mitigation, as well as equitable green growth. And in the realms of climate finance, there's a concerted effort to develop ASEAN-wide regulatory framework, as seen in the ASEAN taxonomy that Mr. Khairul shared. And this has really paved the way for national-level adoption. We've seen countries such as Indonesia, Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore launching its own green taxonomy. The ESG reporting scene has also mirrored a fast-evolving trend across ASEAN. But amidst this dynamic ESG business environment, it's actually a brewing pot of opportunities and risk. If you're not careful and not really watching, it can overflow and scald you. That can come in a form of regulatory fines or consumer backlash. But there are also plenty of opportunities. This was a very interesting study that we did together with PwC, Andrew and his larger team. So we studied the sustainability performance of companies across 15 countries in Asia Pacific, looking at the largest listed companies. And in this study, we found that what companies are using to guide their sustainability efforts, it's the Global Reporting Initiative, as well as the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So these are very, very useful standards and frameworks that businesses can look at using. So instead of feeling overwhelmed by the universe of reporting standards out there, companies can effectively deploy their resources to take on a more targeted approach. So in the next 3 slides, I would like to highlight 6 ESG trends and also provide you with some useful resources that you can look at. But I'll quickly speed you through these 6 trends before moving on to focusing on the business case for ESG. So we do see a prominent trend of investors increasingly demanding for sustainability disclosures. It will be of value to keep a lookout for the Project Savannah, which will be launched at the COP28 next week. And that is a digital ESG system catering to SMEs worldwide. Businesses can use this platform to generate their basic sustainability credentials and also track alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. And in managing your ESG data, look to leverage on existing digital disclosure platforms and portals that can help you with presenting your reporting data in a structured manner. Governments and businesses are also scaling up capacity building with international partners to address the large-scale threats that we all recognized here. And in the global race towards net zero, ASEAN, it's a major manufacturing hub. It's increasingly facing pressure to decarbonize. But what many might not realize is that your business will always be playing catch-up if you do not underwrite what sort of capital expenditure needs to go into decarbonizing your investments. So recognizing the gaps and challenges in the ESG landscape, we're also seeing governments across ASEAN enacting change by supporting SMEs in practical ways through green financing and opportunities in digitalization, which is really a key driver in promoting equitable growth that we talk about in this region. So now we've discussed the pertinent sustainability trends and enablers out there, which covers what is out there. Now I'll take you through the how we can do it. The key takeaway from my presentation is how do we build a business case for sustainability? Most start with compliance. However, what we should be looking at is streamlining our resources to be targeted in addressing the most critical issues within the business. Materiality assessment here is the process by which companies identify and prioritize ESG topics based on the potential impact it has on the business and its stakeholders. Here are 4 critical considerations to look at. Each industry has its own unique sustainability challenges and opportunities. You could use the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is renowned for their materiality map. It covers all industry sectors, and it tells you exactly what are the top material issues for your industry that you operate in. And this offers a quick jump start for businesses with limited resources. Consider also the unique challenges and offerings in your operating region, as well as the concerns of your investors, your customers, your employees, and regulators. Well, the way a company operates also determines your material issues. For example, a company that is heavily reliant on natural resources might consider resource depletion and conservation as more material than a company with a more diversified supply chain. So once we've addressed these 4 factors and identified what ought to be of material importance, we then translate this into a strategic value proposition. If you're running a business and wanting to maximize the returns of your sustainability efforts, it's important that your customers know how your work with the environment or social agenda can benefit them. So to do this, the most important of all, it's the governance aspect. So make sure that you establish a sustainability governance organizational structure to steer your business, and then you can work through these internal and external focus areas. These are the critical touch points that you can focus on. I'll give you an example. Topiku, it's a good one. It actually stands for My Hat in Indonesian. So Topiku has, they basically customize sustainable hats by empowering local artisans and using local recycled materials. So in this example, we see a very clear social and environmental value that is communicated. Topiku also pioneered the world's first life cycle analysis of a baseball cap's greenhouse gas emissions. And over here, we see them really riding and harnessing on the ESG wave and the potential, and establishing a very strategic positioning of being a green supplier. And they're very attractive to global MNCs or governments out there that has established their own net zero commitments. Topiku has also excelled in articulating the complex notion of carbon footprinting to a layman by using very powerful infographics, as you can see here. And at the bottom of this slide, we see the very familiar rainbow colors from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So Topiku has clearly identified 6 out of the 17 goals that resonates with their business. And it's really not about trying to meet all 17 goals, or a case of the more the merrier, but rather focusing on the goals that matters and relates to the material issues in your business. Here are a few more examples of success stories in the region if you want to find out more. And in my final slide, seeing that we're all in Korea, and with my love for kimchi, I've come up with this approach for us to remember. So to develop your business case for sustainability, first and foremost, I'll say, work towards establishing sustainability KPIs. So your KPIs has to be SMART goals. So meaning it's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, relevant, and time-bound, targeting each of the material topics that you've identified. Accountability matters as well. So work towards setting sustainability KPIs that are linked to your top management's remuneration. Look out for internal and external opportunities. This could involve making changes to your operations, your products, your services, or your value chain. And measure your progress towards your sustainability goals. This will help you track your success and adjust your strategies as needed. And be transparent about your sustainability progress, because by doing so, you are articulating or presenting the financial value of your firm. An effective ESG integration helps mitigate risks, cut costs, and drive higher valuation of your company at exit. And not forgetting to communicate your goals, progress, and challenges to your stakeholders. It's important to get everyone in your organization on board with your sustainability goals. And you will have to train and empower your employees, your customers, and work closely with sustainable suppliers. We have to hear our stakeholders as well. Different stakeholders are motivated by different things. So focus on what's in it for each stakeholder and establish a clear stakeholder engagement plan to solicit feedback and to also stay abreast with their changing expectations. Finally, seek to continuously improve. Sustainability is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So continue to improve your sustainability effort as innovations and technologies become available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tan, for the presentation. We'll definitely remember the key takeaway, kimchi. Well, moving on, we have the last but not the least, Ms. Krisztina Grütter, the founder of Swiss Sustainability Consulting, who will deliver her presentation on green development for ASEAN SMEs, green finance, and capacity building. Let's welcome her with a big round of applause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Krisztina Grütter, the founder of Swiss Sustainability Consulting, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for the invitation. And as mentioned, I'll speak about green financing and capacity building for SMEs here in Asia. So to start with, I thought just to give a very short background on the importance of SMEs, that most of us know that they are important, but looking at the numbers, what they really represent here in the ASEAN region is really impressive. As Andrew also mentioned already a few numbers, but I was sincerely shocked as I read that there are 70 million MSMEs here in the ASEAN region, and they represent the biggest chunk, the vast majority of the firms, so nearly 98% here in the region. And also 85% contribution to employment and close to 50% of GDP, so 45%. These numbers are truly impressive, and it clearly shows that without bringing SMEs on the green path, we won't make the green transition. Unfortunately, having said that, the research clearly shows that they are really lagging behind when it comes to integrating sustainability and really integrating ESG in their core operations. So what can we do? What are the challenges what they face? Because we have to understand their challenges so that we can address them. Here is the high-level short list. The first one, based on the studies, is balancing the ESG goals with business growth. So transitioning the SMEs to their sustainable business model and really integrating the ESG considerations. The second one, as also mentioned previously, lack of access to technical know-how and ESG specialists. And this makes them very difficult in understanding and implementing the ESG frameworks, which obviously hinders the growth. Cross pressures are very important. So when the SMEs are implementing ESG investments, they really have to find out the right balance between their cost savings and the ESG-related investments. And always we come back to reporting, because the reporting standards are crucial, fundamental, and if they are not standardized and hard to measure, then it's very difficult to advance. Here I give you a further background on all the different challenges what the reports have found. It's a long, long list, so I don't want to delve into it. I want to more concentrate on what can we do about it. But you can see that apart from the first 3 points, we see many items around stakeholder acceptance or insecurity, what exactly their investment means on their return on investment. So let's have a look at the key main points, what we can really do about it, which is green financing and capacity building. So starting with the first element is green financing. SMEs have a very limited access to finance, as unfortunately we know. They face higher interest rates and more stringent collateral requirements in the bank loans. And also they face lack of expertise. So we need two elements to really advance green financing. On one hand, we need the financial instruments, and the other hand, the expertise so that they can really implement it. On the expertise piece and technical knowledge, we'll dive more into the second part of the presentation, the capacity building. So let's see how can we really move the funds and green finance towards the SMEs. The very important one is oops, sorry, apologies, I jumped ahead, sorry for that. So very important one is supporting access for green finance. Banks can obviously do a lot as their lenders. They can offer reduced interest loans, which is obviously very positive for the SMEs, or they can offer credit lines that are given by international banks. If they are then provided here locally in the ASEAN member states, then it provides a longer-term financing option for the SMEs, and it's more feasible than for them to borrow. Very often the rates are not subsidized. So in that sense, it's important to mix it and bring in the capacity building elements such as grant-funded consultancy services or training. And that together improves the efficiency of the investments. It's also not just the interest rates themselves, but the conditions. So bank can offer better loan conditions, and also insurance companies could offer less stringent insurance policy conditions for the SMEs who are really showing green credentials. The next element which really could boost the financing is the taxes. So tax privileges are a very important drivers for the SMEs, and they can also boost the establishment of new SMEs in the region. We fortunately see really a growing use of tax incentives here in the ASEAN region. So a good example is, for example, Malaysia, the government is encouraging green technology tax incentives. A further bucket, I would say, that would definitely help the SMEs is the grants and free consulting services. So we can offer them subsidized consultancy services or grants to buy their environmental technologies. Or even direct subsidies or technical assistance could be very useful. And as Andrew has alluded to it earlier, here comes now the big ticket item, the green public procurement. So procurement here in the ASEAN region is really a huge driver for demand. So if we embed, as Andrew have given very specific examples for that, thank you for that kind of jumping ahead. So then that can really help the SMEs to produce, offer green products and services, and even bring down the costs accordingly. And finally, which is also mentioned by Andrew, a very important driver are the green supply chains. Since here in ASEAN, the majority of the SMEs are part of a big supply chain. If they're global nature, then the ESG requirements are higher standards given the international regulations, as it was alluded earlier from the EU or US. So that means for the SMEs, it's very hard for them to meet these green challenging requirements, but once they can offer this threshold, then it really opens up opportunities. They have access to knowledge flow, global markets, and really huge firms that are environmentally conscious. And the supply chain finance is a very important element because many of the SMEs in the ASEAN region, they struggle with bankability. And the supply chain finance kind of brings them on board, these tiny MSMEs, and brings them in the bankability system. Similarly, there are many platform companies. They are not necessarily supply chains, but work similarly in that way. The very famous one is Lazada, Grab, etc. Lots of SMEs are working with these platform companies, and the platform companies are bringing them on board, and accordingly, this is the first point of entry for them, and through them, they improve the ESG commitment and integration. So this gives you a good overview of all the different possibilities for green financing. But as said earlier, there are two big buckets, the financing and providing the funds, and the second piece is the capacity building. So let's see now which are the options for capacity building. The first and foremost I would highlight, and in my view, the most important one, is the digital capacity building. Since the complexity of ESG adoption is really overwhelming for the SMEs at the beginning, so through the technology and digitalization, you can bring down this complexity. Having said that, the digital reporting, especially at the beginning, is a very cumbersome and intense learning curve for the companies. So accordingly, the digital capacity building is a very powerful instrument. Unfortunately, still many of the SMEs do not use technology here in the region. In Malaysia, half of them, Indonesia, it's even 60% or close to 60%, they don't touch technology for ESG, which is really something we need to work on and change. Data is extremely important. It has to be actionable, scalable, tool has to be centrally accessible. And the visual aspect, the visualization, helps the SMEs to really understand what is my footprint and where are my really pain points are, where can I really improve the output. So a visual digital solution is extremely important. The next one we mentioned very briefly earlier, the green finance knowledge building. So on both ends, the SMEs need capacity building training. They have to understand, how do I make a green business case? What is the documentation needed? Or for example, how can I really reflect my savings that come from a green investment in my projection? So that has to be really taught and showed to them. But on the other end, also banks, the lenders need capacity building so that they can assess better the green finance projects. It's not just the very specific green finance know-how which is needed, it's a much broader educational context that is also needed. So what do you need for green credentials? How do you do ESG integration? So this broader learning is just showing you one example from Singapore, where I'm located, is the government gives a very useful tool, the Enterprise Sustainability Program, which subsidizes 70% for the SMEs, this broader knowledge building. So that's a very good method, just as an example. Another examples are tools for capacity building. Obviously, SMEs need the tools to implement. So it could be very specific, like a solar energy calculator, but the broader one, like a self-assessment tool. The self-assessment tool, then they also learn how can they integrate ESG, and through that, it's very important they can demonstrate the investors, the finance, so that they have better access to financing accordingly. Again, another example from ESGpedia, where it was designed to lower the barriers of entry for the SMEs and make the reporting of the metrics accessible. So going back to the list of what all the ESG capacity building, the final two to finish with, is very important, the free ESG capacity building resources. For example, the UN Global Compact ESG Hub, which provides the SMEs step-by-step guidance to define, implement, measure, and communicate the sustainability reporting. Or there are also the ASEAN Strategic Action Plan for SME development. So there are several examples. And to finish with, also it was mentioned that networks and really cooperation is key in the region to advance it. No one can do it alone. So networks like, for example, the ASEAN SME Academy is very important. Like they offer courses totally free of charge online, and they provide upskilling, really targeting ASEAN SMEs. And to finish with, I would like to quote like a very positive example how really current examples are happening. It's every day there are new initiatives and we have to really push them ahead to get to the SMEs. The most recent one is from GRI that actually, as we speak, this very week they're opening up a Sustainable Innovation Lab. Actually, the launch was in Singapore yesterday, so 20th of November. And the goal is really provide capacity building and help the SMEs with reporting. So this very final recent example gives us hope. We see that we really invest a lot, and as Andrew said, there is a lot of initiatives, but we have to be aware of the unfortunate hurdles that still remain, and we have to use these two types of instrument listed here: green finance, providing the funds, and on the other hand, capacity building, providing the knowledge. And these together are extremely powerful, but we don't have time, so we really have to move quickly. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grütter, for your presentation. Having heard to the four presentations, we're now going to move on to the roundtable discussion. So if you did not submit your question yet, this is your chance to do so. So please go into the QR code and submit your questions. Having said that, let me now pass on to the mic to our moderator, His Excellency Shin Nam. Sir, please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for our four presenters. They covered all kinds of the issues relating to the ESG. Now we have around 28 minutes left before we start launch. So my idea is we're gonna our roundtable discussion, we're gonna discuss among ourselves 4+1, and then I will give a floor to the participants if there is any comment or question. So first part, to break ice among ourselves, I have some comments and some questions for our presenters. Well, I found throughout the four presentations, there are some cross-cutting issues. The first is the capacity building. All of them emphasize, some of them emphasize the importance of the capacity building issues, of course, which is very important. And second thing is about the guideline, maybe in the form of taxonomy, guideline or regulation also important for ESG, especially for the small and medium enterprise. So I have some questions. The first is on guideline and taxonomy. The first presenter said the ASEAN taxonomy is a kind of the voluntary in terms of its nature. So the taxonomy could be implemented at the national level. You need the national level taxonomy. So far, according to the Ms. Tan's presentation, the 3 ASEAN members adopted the taxonomy, which are the Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. So how do you see in the future, through your introduction of ASEAN-wide taxonomy, how do you see the possibility of more members will adopt such national level taxonomy? And then the second question to Ms. Tan, you talk about the greenwashing issue, which is also very important relating to the guideline or the regulation. I think it will be also a more serious issue in the future because the ESG will be the more implemented in ASEAN level. So I think it's a really challenging. Greenwashing is a challenge. How to avoid this kind of thing? And so, what is your recommendation to the public sector? Public sector of the ASEAN member countries, including the Korea. We are all partners in working together on this on these efforts. So, and then second thing is what kind of recommendation to the business sector? That's my question. And on the capacity building issues, if I share with you my public sector experience, I have been involved so many years in the climate change negotiation. In the negotiation, the most important urgent issue is the mitigation. So how we gonna reduce our emission country by country? So we have it's not only the developing or developed country. We have some pressure. How to reduce? We gonna make a commit? How much we gonna reduce our emission at the international negotiation level? So of course the developing country they got the more pressure. But after attending so many climate change negotiation, I found out that kind of pressure or is not enough. Of course, each member country will make a determination. Is a nationally determined, voluntary determination determined, but that's not enough, especially for developing country. As mentioned in the Paris Agreement, we should provide some support to developing country, maybe in the form of technology or funding. But I think most important thing is the strategy, providing them strategy. Sometimes technology or funding is not enough. So that's the reason the Korea established the international organization named the Global Green Growth Institute, which organization we provide the nationally tailored strategy to each developing countries. Now the ASEAN members, we have 4 ASEAN members among the 18 founding members when we established 11 years ago. So I think the ASEAN members are very eager to follow the international trend. So the point is how we gonna provide them the right guideline and regulation, and then also the best capacity building. So that's my comment, and then I have 2 questions. Can you answer some questions? Thank you.
Okay, perhaps I can start. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your questions. I think on the ASEAN taxonomy, when the ASEAN Taxonomy Board first started, to develop this project, this was in early 2021. At that stage, in terms of national taxonomies by ASEAN countries, the Malaysian Central Bank had already issued their taxonomy, and the Malaysian taxonomy is a principles-based taxonomy, similar to the ASEAN Foundation Framework. Singapore also had started the consultation, the first of a series of consultation papers on their taxonomy. And Singapore, their approach was to have a screening criteria based, using detailed thresholds to determine eligibility. So I think the ASEAN approach then, we noticed these developments, but then, the question was, where are we heading? Is every country in ASEAN going to issue their own taxonomy? But we also, ASEAN was also cognizant that each country, as you mentioned, Your Excellency, national, the NDCs of each country may differ from one country to another. They have their own needs and agenda to address. So the ASEAN taxonomy was meant to provide, as I mentioned, that the common language across ASEAN. So ASEAN countries which had not yet started a taxonomy, they may choose to adopt the ASEAN taxonomy. And of course, that foundation framework that I was talking about, being principles-based, is easier to adopt, and I think it was foreseen that most countries could adopt it. But also, in coming up with the second part of the taxonomy, the plus standard, which had the detailed criteria, those countries which wanted to go a step further and did not want to develop their own taxonomy in terms of such detailed criteria could also adopt the ASEAN taxonomy. So it's an overarching guide for the whole of ASEAN. It provides that the possibility of ASEAN member states adopting it, but it also does not clash with each country's own sustainability-related initiatives. So if they do wish to develop their own national taxonomies, which after the publication of the first version of the ASEAN taxonomy, Indonesia came up with their taxonomy, Thailand also, and Malaysia has a second taxonomy actually, the Securities Commission's SRI taxonomy, which is more meant for those in the capital market sector. So those came out, but I think what was heartening was that they had the ASEAN taxonomy to refer to. And in each of those taxonomies, reference was made to the ASEAN taxonomy, to find commonalities, alignment, and so on. So I think in answer to your question, how many more taxonomies are coming out? We know that the Philippines have indicated that they are in the process of developing their taxonomy, and at the start it's going to be a principles-based taxonomy. But the ASEAN taxonomy is there for guidance. And I think if I can just touch on capacity building as well, which I didn't cover in my presentation. I think it's something that we're aware of, that taxonomies in general, the larger corporates tend to rely on those. And it is a problem for smaller entities because there is a lot of, I think, data gathering, involved, and this may not be something feasible to a lot of SMEs. So I think it's something that we're looking at as well in terms of the taxonomy, especially in terms of awareness and capacity building, how we can communicate to SMEs the importance of sustainability and reference to the taxonomy as a guide. So those additional initiatives are a part of the project as well. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and address the second question. So thank you, Ambassador Shin, for the question on greenwashing, right? Okay, so I think greenwashing is a term that I think all of us here would be familiar with. Yeah, can I have a show of hands if we've all heard the term greenwashing? Okay, that's good. So just to get an indication. Okay, so maybe I'll try and distill this and sort of give a context to the seriousness of the issue and what businesses and policymakers can do. So coincidentally, I mean, just this month, so at the Center for Governance and Sustainability, we published a paper with CCCS, which is the Competition and Consumer Commission of Singapore, looking at greenwashing among companies, online companies selling products. And what is very worrying is that we realize that when we look across the board, more than 50% of the companies that claim to have green products actually do not substantiate their claims. So this is a big concern out there because consumers then don't know if they can trust what they see online. And a lot of these companies are also using very technical terms that a layman on the street might not understand what it is, and that is worrying. So in terms of what we should do, I think so a lot of policymakers are actually looking at how can we guide companies on what are some of the things that signifies greenwashing. So common terms that we notice that are I think let's just start out as most companies, we don't start with the intent to want to greenwash, right? It's always, it's more unintended. But there are actually certain words that can be avoided. So words like eco-friendly or sustainable or conscious, these big words, whenever you want to use these big words, always think about substantiating it. So how do we do it? One useful way would be to look for third-party certification. So try and substantiate your claims with third-party verification. There are a lot of industry standards and certifications out there that can guide you in the right direction. So I think in terms of policymakers, it's useful to guide companies. But for businesses themselves, I think what is foundationally important is that before embarking on any marketing sort of claims, it's always important to center on what is your sustainability priorities in your business. So earlier on, I talked about the material issues. In coming up with your organization's sustainability strategies, how does your products and services align to your overarching strategy? And I think that is very important in setting the foundation of what you're trying to deliver to your clients, your stakeholders. Okay. Yeah, and I think And another interesting observation we found from the paper was that a lot of companies are claiming that they are eco-friendly, but they don't mention to what extent the product is eco-friendly. So for example, if I say I have an eco-friendly book, does it mean it is 100% eco-friendly, or maybe it's only the cover page that is made of recycled material? So being precise in your disclosure would guard you from being labeled as greenwashing.
Thank you. Krisztina or Andrew, do you have any comment or question on other presentation?
Just comments-wise, I just reinforce that, again, it's the specifics in implementations, as Sharmine's mentioned. It's okay having policies, it's okay saying we do classify to this taxonomy, but we also highlight just because you're a company in the green sector does not mean you're sustainable. You could be a solar panel company, but you could have awful labor practices and terrible waste disposal practices. It doesn't equate to being sustainable. So it's always about drilling down into the specifics. I like the example from Sharmine just now. If a company says they're sustainable, you've actually got to look at what specific parts of it. So again, going into the details. Another term just to introduce, there's another one. Instead of greenwashing, there's also greenhushing. So that's also trending quite a bit as well.
Maybe just reaching back to one point that all of us kind of mentioned, and I do think that it's really crucial, the digital piece of the integration, because speaking about greenwashing as well, as long as we do not have clear data, clear view, clean transparency, anyone can kind of claim anything. If you have a very clear kind of digitalized solution and you can really show it what you're doing, that kind of gives you back real levy that you're doing it well. And I do believe as well that not just from the private sector, from the companies, it's important that they act, but also on the regulatory side. So we do see, especially in Europe, the regulators are clearly stepping up and making very clear regulations against greenwashing. One of the ones really leading is the UK, and they have also oversight bodies. They are really screen through the entire market, check which company is doing what, and just literally bringing them to court and highlight that this is a litigation case that we can bring you against if you are not complying. So these three elements, I think, from the companies, substantiated kind of claims, supported by digital kind of credentials, and on the government side to have the regulatory side.
Thank you. Well, I think the greenwashing is a kind of the Hollywood action. You can see in the football games. Sometimes the attackers they fell down without any intrusion of the defense players. So these days the referees are they have a very sharp eyes to find out. Sometimes the player who committed the Hollywood action got the warning directly from the referees. You can see the TV in the football games every weekend. So, but the point is sometimes there are greenwashing start in the intentional, but sometimes unintentional greenwashing. In that case, I think our public sector government provide the right guideline and regulation, as well as some right education, providing some know-how to avoid that kind of greenwashing. Where once it was judged by the importers, it is clearly greenwashing, then the company will be a very serious trouble in the future. I mean, in the days coming years, greenwashing will be the more serious issue. So the government sector, we should provide all the necessary measures or the right directions to rightly guide to avoid any greenwashing. And then about the supply chain, Andrew made the presentation. Where international trend setting is basically coming from outside our region, mainly from European Union or US. So, but we have to embrace them to have a business with them and trade. So the point is how we gonna adapt about the due diligence issue, the directive which will be adopted by European Union. It will be a very serious issue for the all other partners outside the European Union. So this is really a heavy challenge for us to meet. I think so. Now we have some minutes to left, so I will give a floor to the participants. If they have any question or comment on the presentation or on our topics, feel free to mention it. Do you have any questions, comment on the floor? There are some questions. The first one is to Mr. Khairul. Second is Ms. Sharmine. Can you read the questions and then
I can, Your
answer?
Excellency.
Yes.
Okay, just to read it out, I don't think everyone can see. My question is, what do you think about the necessity and practical possibility of establishing a common taxonomy across the world beyond the ASEAN taxonomy? So I think when ASEAN set out to create the taxonomy, we were very cognizant that I think at that point the so-called global taxonomy, or the most established taxonomy at that point, was the EU taxonomy. And one of the principles that we adopted in developing the project was that we would definitely look at or refer to existing taxonomies, especially when it comes to the science-based criteria and so on, because I think you can't argue with the science. But we needed to contextualize it to meet the needs of this part of the world, of this region. Because I think I'll give you an example in terms of we refer to the EU taxonomy and so on, and a lot of the criteria that the EU taxonomy has is in reference to existing articles and regulations in EU law. So it is more meant for countries and stakeholders in the European Union. So we couldn't adopt the EU taxonomy wholesale. And when we came up with the criteria that is aligned with the EU taxonomy, as I mentioned, we had to sort of reverse engineer it because we couldn't refer to the laws in the EU which those criteria are based on. So I think that just goes to show that from the start we had this realization that we couldn't rely on one taxonomy to be the guide. And I think this was reinforced with, conversations that were coming out from industry associations as well. ASIFMA, for example, which is an organization of financial industry participants, also recognize in their principles in creating taxonomies that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. You must make allowances for regional and national needs and criteria. So I think the thinking is more there that we're not heading towards one common global taxonomy. However, we are looking at interoperability between these taxonomies and looking for equivalence as well, where it can be done. Equivalence in the sense that how ASEAN is aligning the green tier to the EU taxonomy, so that there is less fragmentation and to ease users who are operating in multiple jurisdictions as well. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question to Ms. Tan is about the incentives.
Okay, sure. Yeah. It's a pretty long question, but let me try and read it out, okay? Okay, so the question given to me is, given the prevalent cost sensitivity among ASEAN SMEs, where their primary focus is on generating profits, and considering their limited awareness of how ESG can influence their business, how can we strategically formulate incentives to prompt these SMEs to actively participate in ESG initiatives, aside from capacity building support? So if I understand this question correctly, we're looking at what sort of incentives can be provided to SMEs other than capacity building support. Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think SMEs, a lot of them set up with wanting to really embark on sustainability, but they don't have enough resources and don't know how to go about it. And I think governments play a crucial role here, even NGOs as well. So I think good examples I've seen out there are, incentives surrounding actual equipment or infrastructural support for SMEs. So for example, now we're in Marriott. It's a hotel, right? And hotels, when we look at their material issues, one of the key material issues is surrounding food waste from an event. We have a lot of food waste. What do we do with it? And so if given a scenario like that, could we get different hotels to collaborate together, to work together, to provide incentives in purchasing a food waste digester machine, for example? So it's really looking at what are the critical material issues for your business, and how can we collaborate within the industry itself to find collective solutions. And that's where incentives can really help to move the needle. But I think, going back to the capacity building piece, I think when we look at incentives, there's always this two main focus, as Krisztina mentioned, right? It's really about green financing and capacity building. A lot of green financing is surrounded around how can we go about capacity building. And I think interesting observations that I've seen and also been involved in is really around how can we expand on the knowledge. There's a huge body of knowledge on sustainability, but there's also tremendous confusion around it. How do we get the entire organization to understand what sustainability is? So in Singapore, we have a lot of the local universities like the National University of Singapore and the Singapore Management University, focusing on coming up with mandatory sustainability courses for all their undergraduate programs. So I think that is something that can be useful for ASEAN countries, sort of to ensure that our younger generation is equipped with the knowledge required before they enter the workforce. And if you are already in the workforce, there is tremendous potential as well. So I've been working with corporates on how can we inculcate sustainability knowledge across the entire business, across different business units, everyone speaks a different language and we all have different KPIs, but how can we come to that common ground? So we come up with this digital learning platform. So in a form of an e-module, some companies are looking at mandatory e-modules for all their employees as part of their orientation and onboarding program. And this sort of an e-module can actually be tailored to the industry that you're working in. So there is that tailoring component to help the different business unit understand the sustainability issues relevant to their scope of work and what are the actions that they can take.
Thank you. Yeah, I think time is up. Thank you very much for our presentation, and then thank you to the floor. I think today's event, including our panel discussion, is a starting point or a small step, but I'm sure it's a giant implication in sustainable development in our region and then for our cooperation, our two partners. Thank you. I close our session.